Welcome to Military Faith and Spiritual Resilience. This is Elizabeth Fulgaro. Here with me is Erin Nichols, nutrition and fitness coach and Gold Star wife. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Thank you for continuing your story with us.
Happy to.
So, at the end of the last episode, you were sharing that you'd just gotten word that Sam was injured, seriously injured, and you were on your way to see him at the hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. Could you continue your story there?
Yes, nice German pronunciation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Landstuhl. Wait till I bring up Rammstein. Yeah, so it was kind of crazy because just the whirlwind of the travel and, changing time zones, going to the other side of the world. And we left Sacramento, so, the west coast of the United States at 3 o'clock on Thursday. And then we arrived in Germany at around 7 a.m. Saturday.
Oh, my.
Germany time.
Mm-hmm.
Pacific time, it was still our 4th wedding anniversary.
Oh, my goodness, Erin.
So he got hit July 24th. July 27th was our wedding anniversary. So, Donnie and I, my brother-in-law and I were traveling basically on our anniversary. And then when we got there, it was really overcast. And because it was overcast, our sense of time was so destroyed at that point. Just could not tell what time of day it was. And the sun, the lack of sun, the sky wasn't helping. And I want to say it was like 2 to 3 hour drive or something like that from Frankfurt to Landstuhl as well. In our non-German Ford Taurus, our boring Ford Taurus. And a Marine liaison drove us and then brought us to the hospital. And the weirdest part when we went in to see him was that his head was shaved.
Huh.
And when he first got to boot camp, they shave your head. You don't get the jar head cut until toward the end of boot camp. You don't rate it, as they would say. But I had never seen him with that. By the time he graduated boot camp, he had, a medium reg haircut. He had hair on top.
Sure.
And so that was like the first thing I noticed was that he basically had like a buzz cut. Like a number 1 all over, and there were tubes, and he had literally a bolt that was kind of at the front of his hairline. There's a bolt on one side and a drain on the other, sticking out of his head. But his face wasn't injured at all, and so he just looked like him. But he had a breathing tube in his mouth, down his throat, and then, tubes and wires everywhere else. But yeah, it was the shaved head that was the thing that really, took me aback. So we kind of got briefed on what his status was. He was critical but stable. Got the tour of his injuries. Besides the brain injury, he had a fractured neck, the facets, I think, at C3 or C4. So he was in a C-spine collar. His spinal cord was fine. He had broken his arm, his right arm, in 2 places, his upper arm and his elbow. And then there was a big, gash. So he had all these wound vacs all over him. And they told me before that he had burns. And so I'm, learning all of this stuff. I didn't know what a wound vac was until that point. So I'm seeing these things, and it turns out it's the wound vac, where it's like this sponge. Kind of looks like the soft cover that goes over a microphone, that color. And then it's literally under this almost like saran wrap thing, and then it's under suction. And so it sucks down into the wound and is drawing out the bits. And but I just see this big black stuff that's covered, and I thought these were all burns.
Oh.
So I see this thing on his right arm, and then there's a huge one on his hip. He lost on his right hip, the side where the blast was. Just a lot of the meat from his right buttock and hip, and then about half of his calf muscle, and a good chunk from the front of his shin as well. So he lost 3 inches of his fibula, the small bone in the lower leg. And then he had a big gash. There's probably a 10 to 12 inch suture scar on his low back. And broken ribs. They had chest tubes and things like that. Ruptured his spleen. So yeah, a lot was going on with him. And even having kind of that physical stuff to focus on was almost a nice distraction from the coma.
So the coma was more distressing.
Yeah.
Than the wounds.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you can live a really great life with, without a limb or two, or with some gnarly scars, but life in a coma is a little different.
It is. What were they giving you if he was critical? Were they giving you any idea on prognosis at that point?
Not at that point, while we were in Germany. And so we only ended up spending like 24 hours in Germany, kind of as they anticipated. So, and that was kind of as long as he remained stable. The plan is, there was a plane going out. We got there Saturday morning. There was a plane going out from Ramstein on Sunday, medevac back to DC. So Donnie and I stayed at Fisher House, and the next morning, only one of us could fly on the medevac. So Donnie had to go back with the Marine liaison back to the Frankfurt airport and fly commercial. And I went on the medevac. We had an amazing Air Force medical team. I can't remember the doctor and the nurse's name. I can picture them. But I know the respiratory therapist was a tech sergeant, and her name was Tammy. And they were incredible, and they took such good care of me. And so they had 2 critical patients, Sam and another patient who were both unconscious. And on the plane, I was thinking of, I could do this. Like, I was still only 23. It wasn't too late to join the Air Force. And so I'm kind of thinking like, well, if this goes the way it's looking like it's going to go, I could join the Air Force. I had certainly thought about it before, and I had always been interested in medical stuff. Physical therapy in particular had been what I was interested in. And so seeing this Air Force crew made me think, like, well, I really don't like flying. I get bad motion sickness. I didn't want that part of it, but just the idea of like the team that they were working on and what they were doing and what it meant to me. And I thought, like, I would love to be able to do that. So I was kind of pondering, what life might be like.
So you're having to, it's not like you don't want Sam there. It's like you're having to face the reality that you may be alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It was probably the most seriously I'd ever actually considered joining the Air Force. I briefly thought about it in high school. I would have been able to get the ROTC scholarship, and I would have got paid to go to college if I did that. But I was in love, and I wanted to wait and see what Sam was doing, and I wasn't that into the idea of joining the Air Force. To be honest, I was more like afraid of basic training, which, that's kind of funny. Think about Air Force basic training to be afraid of, but the idea of moving away from home and all that kind of stuff, and especially of leaving Sam. But yeah, I was really considering, I think this is what, if he had died then, I think I would have joined the Air Force and, maybe even done it as a career. Came from an Air Force family. So that was one of the things that struck me too, just in general, the like cross service response on the casualty assistance side of things. I had no idea how collaborative it would be. There were times when I got off the plane at Andrews, I want to say it was a soldier who came and met me. Army Landstuhl is an Army hospital, but the Army and the Air Force basically take turns
Okay.
6 months or something like that, whatever it is. Basically, who's running launch school, and I think who's running the hospital in Kuwait, I think it is. I could be wrong on that. So I think it's only the commander that like stays the same, the Army commander. And so it happened to be Air Force run basically while we were there. And then when we got to Bethesda Naval Hospital, this was before Walter Reed and Bethesda had merged.
Right.
We had our Marine liaisons, who's basically all these Marines whose job it is to serve the injured Marines and their families. And that is what they're there for. And then the mostly Navy staff. There were some Army staff there as well, but mostly the medical staff was all Navy. And just had we were so well taken care of, especially the Marines' families, because it was a Navy hospital, and it was set up. So we had the Navy Lodge right there, and the base basically exists to support the hospital. It was a very small base, and they have the Navy Lodge there, and they got us rooms. The liaisons were there to coordinate with, anything we needed, but especially like with flights. So, we're on the opposite side of the country, and all sorts of our family, our close, immediate family wanted to be there with us.
Sure.
And so all we had to do was say, this person or these people want to leave on this date from this airport. And they would make it happen. They would send out this information to, this like pool of charities that they had. Somebody would pick up the flight, pay for it, and then at the time it was called the Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund. Now it's Semper Fi in America's Fund. Would cut a check to that person based on the amount of time that they were going to be there, just to help cover expenses back at home. You still have to pay your rent. Even your stay at the Navy Lodge is free, but you still have to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever and your bills. Plus, you're having to eat out every single meal. And it costs money just to be away from home. And so it really made it easy for our family to be there for us.
That's really super.
Yeah. That part was really, really incredible. Just how much help there was, and how much collaboration. I was kind of laughing because just the bureaucracy within the Marine Corps, and I'm sure this is the same across branches. It was like on the casualty assistance side, it was just everything just ran so smoothly, which is amazing. But it was like, why can't this happen inside?
So now you're Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing? What's going on for you? Because now you're day into the hospital and then back to the house at night, right?
It was rough. Yeah. The ICU there, it was the 3rd floor. And the way that the buildings are built, any of the windows were blocked off by the next part of the building. And so it just had this dungeon quality to it.
Oh, lovely.
Which didn't, add to the atmosphere. I was just really in shock and like, I can't believe this is happening kind of feeling. I remember there was like the ICU waiting room, the family room right outside. And there were puzzles in there. And that was usually kind of what we would do to just kind of pass the time. And there was this other family in there. And now I know that this guy was probably very, very seriously injured. But I just remember like the wife or the mom or whatever coming back and they're talking about these things that he's doing. Sam wasn't doing anything. Sam was in the absolute lowest form of a coma that you can possibly be in. And I remember feeling like jealous and irritated that they basically had like positive things to talk about. Now, the positive things we're talking about, it was probably like he was like squeezing a hand or blinking or something like that, like really small things. But it was something, and we had nothing at that point. So, yeah, grief does some rough things. And the thing that the thing that I was really grieving, and two, I was just talking to someone recently about this. When Sam died, I grieved his death, obviously, his absence. But a lot of the grieving that happens, particularly I think when you lose a spouse or significant other, is the grief for your future. And it has a lot to do with you as an individual, your personal future, because you were supposed to be together. You were supposed to be drinking lemonade on the porch, watching the grandkids play.
You're grieving for what will not be.
Exactly. So that was happening. And just in my mind, what is the rest of my life going to be like if it's not going to be what we thought it was? We're supposed to be going to University of Nevada, Reno next semester. And we still didn't know what we necessarily wanted to be when we grew up, but we had somewhat of a plan. And now there was no plan. It was just, is he going to survive? And if he does, what does that look like? And it's certainly never anything that we had anticipated.
Can we continue this?
Yes.
Thank you, Erin. Welcome to Military Faith and Spiritual Resilience. This is Elizabeth Fulgaro. With me is Erin Nichols. Erin is a nutrition and fitness coach and a Gold Star wife. Erin, I'm so thankful that you can continue to share your story with us. At the end of the last episode, you're talking about Sam's now been injured. He has been medevaced back to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and your life has taken a very different turn. And Sam's in a coma, and you don't know if he'll recover at all. Where are you spiritually now at this point?
Confused.
Okay. Can you tell me more?
So, Sam's dad was very calm, and he just had his faith, and he was saying, it's going to be okay. It's in God's hands, and praying. And I can absolutely picture exactly where we were. I was with Donnie, my brother-in-law. We were walking. We were going to McDonald's on the way back to the Navy Lodge. And I can even picture like turning the corner and the grass and everything. And I was telling him, I want what your dad wants. Or I want to feel the peace that your dad has. And we were hearing one thing from the doctors, which was the science, the reality of what was happening. And then there's this faith thing over here. And I'm seeing my father-in-law standing in his faith and having this peace of mind. And I'm a very logical, analytical person. At least that's what my therapist tells me. And that definitely came into play here, because I was telling Donnie, if I just go with what the doctors say, and the science is the science, this is what it is, and I don't put any faith in God, and he dies, I will always wonder, what if I had believed? And so that was this thing in my head. And then I was like, well, if I put my faith in God, that he can survive, that he can be healed, that he can be just still here, whatever that's going to look like, the science is going to be what the science is. But if I can do that and put my faith in God and he still dies, then at least I know I did the one thing that I could have done.
That's interesting. Okay, what happened next?
I probably got some really bad food at McDonald's.
That's a professional comment, right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Never been a big McDonald's person, but we didn't have much. We didn't have many options there. The food court in the hospital closed kind of early, so we were pretty much on our own for dinner, which usually ended up being McDonald's. So I think it was. I'm not sure exactly the days. It might have been the very next day, though, that he got the phone call at like 5 o'clock in the morning, dead asleep in the Navy Lodge. Phone rings. Not sure if it was my cell phone or if it was the hotel phone, but frantic beeping in the background. Nurse is on the phone.
Oh, dear.
Mrs. Nichols, you need to get over here right away. Your husband is taking a turn for the worse.
Oh, dear.
So I jump up. I call, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, and I think maybe one other person was there with us at the time. It was a day, like a bunch of people were leaving that day. So we all jump up. We run over to the hospital. We get there in the ICU, and I just remember standing there and like holding his hand or something like that and rubbing his arm. And his heart rate was like 225 or something like that. At the time, I didn't know a lot about the medical stuff. I didn't know a lot about what was going on with the monitor. I just knew his heart was going really fast. And I'm just talking to him and trying to get him to calm down. And I'd gotten really good at that, of getting him to calm down with the PTSD and all that. And so at no point did I realize how serious it was. I felt really calm, actually, right then, that everything was going to be okay. I didn't realize our Marine liaison was there behind us in his skivvy shorts and skivvy shirt.
Oh, my.
The chaplain was there. That was it. Like, they thought that was it.
They thought he was passing.
Yeah. It never occurred to me that that's what was happening. I mean, they called me, and like it was bad stuff was happening, but I just felt really at peace right then. And then it resolved. I don't even remember like exactly what happened, but he was fine after that. And we never had another issue with his heart again.
So he was still in the coma.
Still very much in a coma.
But he's stable.
Yeah. Yeah. He ended up, he did end up with a severe gallbladder infection while he was in the ICU, and he was too fragile to normally they would just remove it.
Yes.
But they weren't able to do that. Instead, they had to put in a billy tube. So it was like this spring pressurized tubing situation, and it was like sucking the bile out of the gallbladder.
Yes.
So it should be kind of like a greenish honey kind of color. And it was like black tar coming out of it. And so whenever this, he spiked a fever, his white count was super high. Whenever that happened, after they had set that drain in and were suctioning it out, you could just like hour by hour see his vitals improve as this infection was being sucked out of him.
Wow.
But yeah, not sure where that is in the timeline as far as this day, but later on that day, they brought, seemed like every time they would have a doctor come talk to me, he would be taller and grayer. And both in his hair and in his demeanor. And essentially they were telling me that we needed to pull the plug. His prognosis was if he survives, he'll be a vegetable. They didn't want to continue life-preserving measures. So the next step for preserving his life would be to put a trach in, because you can only have the breathing tube that goes actually into your throat for so long because your vocal folds will actually like fuse to it. And so that next step of putting the trach in to leave him on the ventilator, they didn't want to do. He had an NG tube, so a feeding tube that went through his nose to his stomach. The next step then for his nutrition would have been doing a G tube. And so those were like the two steps that they didn't want to take. they basically wanted to just let him pass. And so I'm struggling with this like faith thing. The doctors are saying this. My father-in-law is saying this. I believe my father-in-law's brother was there at that point, Greg, and he's a pastor or a minister. And so I'm getting the two of them, and this whole faith overrules fact became kind of the mantra. And so I basically just said to the doctors, like, no, screw you. Do what needs to be done.
So you told them to save him, to
Yeah.
do what they could.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they listened?
Yeah. They did. It was my decision. They listened.
Excellent.
Yeah. So then most everybody went home later that day. And so I think it was just my father-in-law and Uncle Greg and I that were still there. And I want to say, I'm kind of picturing this room that we were in, and like the doctor, this doctor had taken us into this room, and then he left, and then the three of us are there, and it was kind of like this, like, all right, kid, you believe?
Oh, wow.
And so as far as my theology is very different from theirs now.
Mm-hmm.
So, God uses means, and however I got there, But I don't really remember like actually like the gospel being preached to me, which I would say is what needs to happen for you to be saved. Because that's what the Bible says needs to happen, right? Believing comes from hearing the word of God, right? I don't know that that was actually part of it. I really don't remember. Maybe it was. But basically it was like this decision. And it must have been the Holy Spirit that was guiding me there, obviously, to get to that point. But it was like, no, we're gonna believe. And we told the doctors, basically, do the surgery and take a flying leap. And later that day, we went across the street to the metro station, went to downtown Bethesda to Barnes & Noble, and my father-in-law and Uncle Greg helped me pick out my first like adult Bible.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's really special.
Yeah. And that was pretty much the only thing I read for a good week or so. I would sit there by his bedside reading it. I really didn't understand it.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair, right?
Uncle Greg is a very much King James only person, and I would say for anyone who is new to the faith, do not start with the King James Bible. We at least got the New King James, but still, it was really difficult for me to understand without the language barrier
Right.
being there. But I was doing it, and so I kind of got into this. It was a little bit works-based, actually. Now that I think about it, of me like being obedient and doing this thing, but it was like, again, like when I decided, okay, faith overrules fact, faith over science. It was like, this is the thing that I can do, and this is the thing that I can control. So eventually, I'm gonna because we're on like this faith point here, I'm gonna speed ahead a little ways. Several months later, we're at the Palo Alto VA, and I was mostly alone at that point. So Palo Alto is about 2.5 hours away from home, and so we would more or less get visitors like on the weekend. Sometimes someone that would stay for a couple days. My mom did stay with me for like the first week, in my room with me. And then I lived on Fisher House on the VA campus there. And so I'm doing all these things. I started becoming very religious about certain things, and I mean that in a not good way.
Okay.
Wednesdays, the only thing that I read was the Bible. I fasted on Wednesdays. The only thing I had was we had kind of like a family area with a refrigerator and some snacks and stuff like that. I would have chocolate milk. So it was like a little bit of sugar, a little bit of protein to like keep me going, but it was like a couple chocolate milks in the day and water, and that was all I had on Wednesday. Because, miracles like this only come with fasting, prayer and fasting. And so I started to recognize that, I also did this thing where, and I think I got this from Uncle Greg from like this like taped sermon thing that he had given. It was like in his own living room. He was doing this like series or whatever. And it was this thing about reading the Bible, reading the 4 Gospels 4 times in 30 days or 3 times in 30 days, something like that. And I did that. So it was so I started recognizing that I kept trying to find the right combination of things to do to make God do my will.
Oh my goodness. That's a revelation.
Yeah. And it was like, what is the right prayer? What is the right way to pray? What combination of fasting and obedience and prayer and magic words can make God do what I want God to do? And at some point during this was probably after I had started going to church. So I grew up Catholic, and all I basically knew to look for as far as a church was Bible church, like non-denominational is kind of what I was thinking. And so I just Googled Palo Alto Bible Church, and I ended up coming up with Peninsula Bible Church, and started attending there. I basically got adopted by this wonderful lady, Mary Lou, who was, at the time, I want to say she was 83. So, and she's still living. So I think she's like closing in on 100 now.
That's special.
So I would sit with Mary Lou. Probably after a few weeks, she started inviting me to lunch. So on, I believe it was Thursday afternoons, because Mary Lou said so, I had to take a break. And this was like the first self-care kind of thing I did at all. So other than being at church on Sunday mornings now, Thursday afternoons, I would drive down El Camino Real to Sunnyvale to Mary Lou's senior mobile home community, and would have lunch with her, and we would pray, and she would expect me to come with questions about the Bible.
What a great friendship.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was really at this point where I didn't know enough. I didn't get it. I didn't have a great enough grasp of the gospel, of what I was reading, to even have very good questions at that point. I was like dutifully reading, and I just wasn't sure what I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And, 15 years later, 14 years later, you, as a Christian, you spend your entire Christian life reading the same book.
It's true.
And you still get more out of it.
Yes.
Decades
Without
into
stopping.
It. Yeah. So, yeah, the level of understanding I had at the beginning was very minimal. But being at that church, and for the first time sitting under preaching that was actually talking about the words that we read in the Bible, was a revelation to me. I'd never experienced preaching. I grew up with homilies, which seemingly had no connection, or very small connection, to the Bible reading that had happened. Not to disparage Catholics or anything like this. This is just my experience. I didn't get a lot from that. So to hear a passage and then have it like word by word explained and then context connected, and this is how this connects to the gospel, and this is what this means practically for us in our lives, I was like, oh, okay. And it really started to make sense. One, you'll appreciate this because you're a musician. Growing up Catholic, I was used to the liturgical mass.
Yes.
And my dad was the choir director. Before he was a choir director, he'd been in the choir. So since I was probably 4 or 5, we had liturgical music. We literally had like masses that we would play the cassette tapes in the car. And I could like sing the entire, like if it started right now, I could sing along with the entire like Eucharistic prayer.
Oh my goodness.
David Haas and Marty Hagen.
Yes.
Those are the two different
Yes.
masses, and I also know it in Spanish. So it's a very high level of musicality and composition. And then I go to this Protestant church, and I'm like, this is hokey as hell. The whole praise music was it was really hard for me to accept. They had really good music there, looking back, but it was just so different from what I'm used to.
Yes.
But it started to touch me in a way that the liturgy never had. And the words made sense, and the words lined up with the words I was reading in the Bible and the words that were being preached from the pulpit.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Will you stay and continue your story for the next episode?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Erin.